as I'm hitting record here, it's going to be a recorded session today. And you are welcome to chat with us and raise your hands by pressing the hand buttons just to the left of your panel if you want to speak and answer a question or make a comment. We're also going to be using the poll feature today, so please do sort of stay with us so you can contribute to the polls. And we are also going to be answering questions as we go along, so kind of all singing, all dancing. Let's see how we go. So there's still other people joining us while we're online, but let's kick off. Many of you already know me. My name is Emma Weber, and I'm the CEO of Lever Transfer of Learning. So the hashtags we're using today are hashtag ATD and hashtag webinar, because today's webinar is all about the ATD in the US. So I'm a learning transfer specialist, which means we support people in changing after they've been on learning intervention. So we don't deliver any training or learning ourselves. So it's quite interesting to be part of the Association of Talent Development Conference, or as it used to be formerly known, the ASTD, American Society of Training and Development, specifically from a learning transfer viewpoint. But rest assured, what I'm going to be bringing you today is some trends across learning and not just for learning transfer. So this is me at the conference in May earlier on this year. 10,000 learning professionals from 80 countries, 300 sessions delivered. It was quite an event, and there was certainly a lot of learning that was happening within the conference itself. Now, I am intrigued, out of the people that are online here today with us, to check in as to whether you've actually been to either the ATD, which was the first conference, or the ASTD conference before. So I'm just going to run us a quick poll here, which should come up on screen for us. And you can actually, yes, I've attended, I've heard of it, it's on my bucket list. Con, I know you're online today, so that one is specifically for you. Or I'm planning to go in 2016. So I'd love it if you could just take part in the poll to get a sense of how familiar people are with the ATD or the ASTD conference. Okay, we're just waiting for a couple more people to answer. Great. Okay, let's close the poll and share the results. So a few people are looking forward to going. It's on the bucket list. We've got people going in 2016, and I didn't answer the poll myself. And we've got people that have not heard of it and people that have gone before. So we've got a cross section today. I think most people have heard of the ATD conference. So great that we're able to share the learnings with you today. So they are a professional member organisation. They host conferences. They focus on learning, and their real key aim is to empower professionals to develop talent, creating a world that works better. So what I will be doing with you today is sharing with you the most popular sessions, the trends that I saw coming through, a little bit about implications for Australia, the vibe that everyone was talking about, and my favourite session. So that's our sort of run sheet for today, of wanting to share from you a sample of the 300 sessions and what's important coming out of that for us as learning and development professionals. Now, obviously, it's quite a lot to try and grasp across 300 sessions and the trends from that, but I've certainly done my best and really happy to be sharing. So one of the sessions, which was actually on day one, was with Art Cohn. And he was doing a session about creating training to promote learning transfer and behavioural change. So, of course, I was absolutely going to be there. Now, Art's details are all on this slide. Boost to Learn was the website that he was kind of referencing within his presentation. But the thing I really liked about Art's presentation is that he was quite strong on neuroscience and linking his process to the brain. He was also really engaged people in that people were still talking about this presentation on the fourth day. And when I say talking about the presentation, I just mean sort of people that I would connect with or bump into really this for them was one of their key takeaways. So that's why I wanted to highlight and share it with you today. Again, promise this is not just going to be about learning transfer. As you know, I can talk for hours on that. Of course, knowledge doesn't create behavioural change. We all know that, and I'm sure most of us are attuned with art in that area. But he was really keen that when we talked about reinforcement, we looked at cognitive reinforcement, social reinforcement, and behavioural reinforcement. And he linked this back to the way that the brain learns. And he talked about the forgetting curve of the late 1800s, which did worry me slightly that we have still got this old discussion about forgetting information and whether it's learnt information if it's remembered. When, of course, I'm sure most of you are familiar that my view of the world is we need to create behavioural change more than we do to help people remember. I think one of the reasons people are still excited about the forgetting curve is because it can be proven and really linked to neuroscience. So I think that's one of the reasons that is still coming up. But irrespective, Art did go on to share some really interesting facts about learning, and particularly about boosters. So Art was talking about boosters to reinforce, and this is when you send out refreshers, reminders, whether it's a question, whether it's a poll, to participants after they've attended learning. And he said he'd performed some studies to try and work out whether there was a difference in outcome between a 5-second booster, a 30-second booster, or a 5-minute booster. Now, I thought this would be interesting to run as a poll to see if as a group you had any thoughts as to which type of booster was the most effective. So again, I'm just launching a quick poll here: 5 seconds, 30 seconds, or 5 minutes as per Art's research. What are your thoughts? Just give you a couple of minutes to finish the voting here. Thanks everyone for participating. Any more votes coming in? Excellent. Great. So we're all voted there. I'm going to share the results. Ooh, share results. There we are. So guys, I think, to be truthful, that was where I was sitting, in my opinion, when I was sat in the audience of this presentation. But in Art's research, he found that 5 seconds was enough to reinforce the learning, and that there was no marked difference between a 30-second or a 5-second booster. So how interesting is that? And Art's explanation behind this was that what we're actually trying to do with boosters is just cue the brain to not delete the information. So he spoke about the forgetting curve and the deleting of information from the brain as really important, because the brain can only function if it deletes information. If we think about how much we're bombarded with messages every day. So with boosters, he's saying that we just need to remind the brain that it is still a piece of information that we will want to use and that we need to keep in play for us. So that was one interesting point that I felt that came out of that presentation that surprised the audience. And he particularly encouraged people not to worry about rereading large chunks of text, or with a booster reconfirming the content in any type of detail. The participant will have it. It's just that reactivating, which can be as little as 5 seconds within the brain. So the other interesting thing which Art talked about was the phasing of boosters. Now you'll see on my slide here, and I hope you can all view the slides on your computers, I put phasing proposed by Art Cohn. I'm not convinced 100% with the phasing that he's got for his boosters, but these were the cycles that he was working on. It looks quite convenient that he talks about 2 days, 2 weeks, and 2 months. And part of me thinks that maybe from a management point of view. Excellent. Sorry, guys, I'll hide our results from the poll there so we can back to the slide. So phasing proposed by Art Cohn: 2 days, 2 weeks, and then 2 months. And this is where Art linked in that within 2 days you want to do the cognitive reinforcement, which is when you have your quick boosters to remind people. He then spoke about the structure of having social reinforcement at 2 weeks, and behaviour reinforcement at 2 months. And with his social reinforcement, I thought this was quite interesting, almost from a marketing viewpoint. He talked about the way that people learn when they feel that they're achieving alongside others and they're achieving with like-minded people. So he said that you get a much higher uplift in hotels of recycling the towels if the message is something like 81% of our guests recycle our towels, join us, rather than a message around, we invite you to recycle the towels to help the environment. People are much more tuned in to changing their behaviours if it's in a social context and they're doing what other people are doing. So really interesting concept there. And in terms of behavioural boosters, Art was talking about asking the questions of, can you give an example of how you've applied what you've learned to increase business impact? So using questioning to actually gather some information and again reinforce the learning. So we will, of course, talk a little bit more about learning transfer, not much, in the coming slides, but people were quite inspired by Art's work. He also talked about gamification, where you can put points into your boosters or the way that people interact, so you can kind of make it gamified. And interestingly, he'd used the boosters in Africa when they were trying to educate people around AIDS. So really using learning to solve worldwide problems. So this was an interesting session, and Art's information is available online to maybe check that out. Dan Steer was another session that was really talked about in the US. And in fact, he spoke about the practical use of social media in formal learning. Some of you may be following Dan on social media already. If you're not, I encourage you to do so. He really does, put out useful content and kind of engage with his audience. So the first thing to say is that when I got to the room where Dan's presentation was due, it was full. So a popular session, there was no room to actually access the session. Having said that, with the ATD, you can actually access recordings of the session after the event. So luckily, because I wanted to hear what he said, I could actually head back and listen to the audio of his session. So he looked at the format of before, during, and after learning. What can we do as learning professionals to integrate social media and social tools to help the learning process? And very much his philosophy was, don't do in the room what can be done out of the room. And this was so he could really focus, we can really focus when you're in the room facilitating on what's actually happening and shortcut some of the processes outside of the room. So some of the tips that Dan shared with his audience is, before the session, when you're welcoming people, why don't you try YouTube videos to introduce the training and give out the pre-work. You can easily link documents, record a short video message. I know certainly it's something I've done in terms of induction pieces before, to make people feel welcome and to really connect with them before you even meet them. He was a big fan of what he called cross-fertilizing with your social media. And this meant sharing information through maybe a LinkedIn group that you would then tweet or use within a Yammer forum. So not just using one forum, but cross-fertilizing across different social media platforms. And very keen with creating community groups. Now, one of the tools that he shared that he'd used quite extensively for pre-work was Inkle Writer. I don't know if anyone has heard of Inkle Writer. Let's see if I can bring this up here. Inkle Writer is a storytelling app, and Dan had used this for when he was doing things like situational leadership. And he spoke of, in the classroom, he would actually have kind of scripts or stories that he would use to help people learn about situational leadership. He'd actually put these into Inkle Writer. And Inkle Writer kind of, I don't know those of you that remember the sort of, books where you could start the story in one direction and then you chose whether you went to page 23 because someone was escaping the person chasing them because a car had become available, or whether you're actually caught and you have to go to page 18. So Inkwell is a little bit like that you choose your plot as you go forward. So again, just a little tool to maybe experiment with in terms of pre-work, or engaging people in your different stories that can help within learning. One of the other, again, obvious, but I think it needs to be said to some extent, is Dan said that if you are creating a community, you really do need to participate, ask questions, share and comment on posts that are available, particularly at the early stages of a learning or an assignment. So important for you as the facilitator to really get involved with the before tools that you're using. Had some great ideas for during the sessions. He spoke about collaborative note-taking with an app called Ginkgo, and brainstorming questions with an app called Socrative. Both can be downloaded and distributed through the App Store. Now, I've just pulled these up on screen for you here. So note-taking software in terms of Ginkgo really allows you to share notes with each other. And what Dan said he does in a classroom is he actually, for different modules and different sections, makes someone in charge of taking the notes for the group. And then it will go to the next person. And then you will collaboratively distribute the notes at the end of the process. So a really great way to keep those tracking as you go through. Socrative was another app that he spoke about. And this was great for asking questions, a little bit like the way that we have been using polls today. Again, good for engaging people, and you can get live feeds up onto screens within the process. And I believe he actually did a live feed in the demonstration. He also spoke about using smartphones to capture flip charts and using iMovie to create boosters. So very much kind of leveraging the tools that we already have available within our smartphone, just to shortcut some of the learning or some of the recording that's required for our facilitated sessions. And if anyone has got any questions as we go through, do remember that you can raise a hand and ask a question. So feel free to comment or question as we go through. So some great apps there that I hadn't heard of, and certainly one of the interesting points I felt was that a lot of the apps have been coming from education. And I wonder whether our learning trends are really influenced by what people are pioneering within education that then comes through to us in a professional learning environment. So true to form, Dan had broken the before, during and after down for his whole presentation, and he had 2 minutes to discuss the after section. And working in the field of learning transfer, I thought, well, actually, that's quite ironic, because that's usually what happens when we're doing learning, that we leave very little time for the after piece. Again, digressing into learning transfer. Although Dan did have a couple of useful apps that he had used in after. Chatterpix, it's only available on iPhone, but it was quite good fun. It's for taking audio snippets, either from participants or yourself as a facilitator, and then sort of animating it with a picture of a talking head. So again, it's just a bit of fun, but it can help remind or confirm the learnings that have come out of a program. Aurasma was about augmented reality within learning. I have to say, this was getting a little bit too technical for me, but he was talking about where you can have a workbook that features within it augmented reality. So if that is something that's of interest to you, do check out Aurasma. Much more practical, I felt, was the Padlet, which is a wall for comments and resources. So do feel, guys, that if you've got a question or you've used any of these resources, feel free to to share within here. Denise, we can come back to you on that slide. So sorry, I'm just seeing some of those questions there. So Denise, I'll get Jess to liaise with you on making sure that we get those details for you. So sorry that I wasn't on the ball to go back at precisely the right moment. We can do. So a couple of interesting sessions there from Art Cohn and Dan Steer. But what about the overall key trends? Now, when I'm talking about key trends here, I'm really wanting to share with you what I felt the trends were coming away from the conference from a top line observation level rather than a sort of a stats and data level. If you're following my blog or reading our newsletter, you will see that we've connected in with Laura Overton in the UK from towardsmaturity.org, who has a much more sort of analytical and surveys ways to look at the trends of what's happening in learning. So I do suggest reaching out to Laura and getting involved in those sort of trend surveys of what really is happening back in organisations. These key trends were just my observations from a top line level at the conference. So let's kick off onto the key trends, the first one being neuroscience. And it became a bit of an in-joke at the conference in that if you weren't even mentioning neuroscience in your presentation, really you were missing a trick, because it was referenced in, I would say, 90% of the presentations that I went to. What was interesting, it was really hard to identify who were the true brain experts and who was borrowing information from brain experts and brain experts books. And of course, our own David Rock, and when I say our own, I'm speaking for the Australians on the line here. David has headed up the Neuro Leadership Institute in the US, now based in New York, formerly based in Sydney. He founded Results Coaching, I believe back in the 90s. It was certainly going when I first started here in 2002. So, you know, David was kind of leading the way, and his book's very popular in the ATD bookshop about neuroscience in learning and the way that the brain works at work. And I think very much the way that everyone was mentioning it and referencing it, it really is starting to inform the way that we develop our learnings and our learning programs. And again, I don't know who within our community has heard the presentation that I recorded with Colleen, but we certainly had a very good discussion about what is the importance of neuroscience in learning, and particularly in learning transfer. And Gordon, you've asked a question here about mobile. Is there a big trend towards mobile apps being used during learning sessions? Gordon, it's an interesting one. I feel with mobile is that it's certainly talked about, and there's pockets of people starting to use it. I'm not getting the sense that it's still used really widely, and I'll be very welcome if other people want to comment on that, or certainly write in the questions, and I can share that with the group. Laura's study Towards Maturity will talk more about how many people are embracing mobile learning. So, Gordon, for more facts and figures, check out with Laura. My sense is it's something that people are starting to learn how they can use it and what are the options and what are the easy and quick wins. I'm still not seeing that it's being used a lot, particularly in soft skill areas. So hope that answers your question. And Barbara, thank you for sharing that it was 1998 that Results Life Coaching started, and I know you were involved very early on. So yes, certainly David started Results and is now coming into the Neuro Leadership Institute. So in terms of common sense, and obviously this is not to belittle neuroscience at all, because it is absolutely fascinating. And what is fascinating is we can now start to prove a lot of things that we now see as common sense. With reflection being important, people slowing down, taking time to think before they move forward. There's all very, very good brain science behind these pieces. And if you haven't done so, do sort of check out our interview we did with Colleen. Jess at leverlearning.com can help you if you can't access that or find that within social media. So neuroscience, definitely a trend and one to sort of keep our eye on and keep learning going forward. So to talk a little bit more about mobile, which, Gordon, to your question, of course, it's on everyone's lips, and I'm sure we've all seen these sort of facts and figures about the power of smartphones and the fact that there's more devices than people on the planet, and increasing use of global internet page views coming from mobile. When I've been doing a little bit of research around this, I find there's a lot more people actually asking the questions than actually telling us how it's done and how it's implemented. And one of the key things that I loved when I heard from Clay Shirky is that it's not about information overload, which I think we feel that devices are going to give us. It's about filter failure. So much information is available to us on our mobile devices. It's about ensuring for learning that we have the correct filters to get that information to people at the right time and in the right way. So within the mobile area, of course, that links us to go to social. And I think people naturally think of mobile learning and social learning together. And thanks, Con, for sharing what you've read with the latest ASTD research, that mobile has little uptake even though it's much talked about. And Con, that's kind of my sense. What's interesting is Tony Bingham, who is I'm not sure whether he's a CEO or a general manager or whatever you have of a professional organization, but he's certainly the leader of the organization. And he's written a book around social learning, and a lot of it is around the mobile context. So he did a short presentation in one of the opening, one of the general sessions with the whole sort of 10,000 people audience. What I think is interesting, though, a lot of people, had social as the buzzword, but I think there was an opportunity to really create the distinction between social learning and using social media for learning. So social learning can be going down the hall to discuss something with someone, to discuss your learning with someone. Social media learning could be posting that same question that you're going down the hall to ask on Twitter. So the definition of social learning, joining with others to make sense of and create new ideas, was a definition that I quite liked. And they talk about the social learning can be self-organized or orchestrated by facilitators. So it doesn't necessarily mean that there's no facilitator involved in a social learning conversation or a social learning context. So one of the examples that was shared was openpediatrics.org. And Open Pediatrics is a online platform where pediatricians can go to gain knowledge about children's illnesses or children's medicine around the world. And we can see here that it's used in 126 countries currently. And at the conference, actually talked about, they interviewed the person that had created this, and it was really through a need that they saw where they wanted to get the latest information out to Africa, and they wanted the latest information to be available in developing countries from some of the leading institutions in the US. So this is an example of social learning where people very much contribute and build the content and build the conversation themselves, rather than it be content that's generated and pushed outwards. So do feel free to sort of explore Open Pediatrics. Very interesting kind of concept and how that started. The second reference I've put up here is this, the New Social Learning, Collect, Collaborate and Work, which is a book by Marcia Connor and Tony Bingham that was been updated this year. So I think that's a good resource for if we really want to explore social learning. The other social learning resource is a new tool that I saw while I was in the US, the 70-20 tool. Now, in truth, there wasn't much talk about 70-20-10 in the same way that in some years we've had quite a few people really having 70-20-10 as the core of their discussion basis. Certainly Charles Jennings was presenting at the conference and bumped into Charles. He was there. But there was a more discussion around formal versus informal learning and less about the sort of numbers actually driving behind it than I had seen in previous years. So the 70-20 tool is something that's been developed by the Fort Hill Company. And again, if you're a reader of my blog, you'll know that I really value Cal Wick's contribution to learning transfer, and he's an awesome guy. And this is sort of his newest brainchild, working alongside Kathy Granger. You may have heard of Cal from the 6 Disciplines book that's certainly been a real a bestseller within learning, the 6 Disciplines of Learning. It was quite interesting because there really was a trend towards online learning transfer tools. And as you can imagine, my learning transfer radar was on high alert at the conference. The thing that I loved about 70-20 is there is an element of learning transfer within 70-20, but it's also really focusing on social learning. So I think with this tool, Cal and Kathy at Fort Hill have really gone beyond learning transfer to think about how are we really going to socially learn? How are we really going to capture the fact that people are learning continuously on their jobs? And how can we engage a community to socially start to talk about that? So this tool isn't about ticking the box as many other online follow-up tools are, but it's a really interesting sort of collaborative piece, and it doesn't necessarily need to go with a learning engagement. It can just be used with managers. So I really encourage you to check that out, and I think there's certainly one of our tribe, I like to say, up in Queensland is going to be doing a trial with this information, so I may well be able to share some wins with you soon. So on to the trend of embedding transfer and reinforcement. So this was the 4th time that I had been across to the ATD conference, and I certainly saw an uplift in people really seriously talking about embedding transfer and reinforcement this year, more so than in previous years. What was interesting, though, is that everyone was using sort of different language and different terminology around the topic. And certainly I was in a session with Stephanie Woods, which she had a 14-step process to take people through being ready, learn, transfer, and sustain. So feel free to sort of, to research a little bit into Stephanie's work. But one of the stats that she created from a survey that she had looked at was fewer than 25% of managers devote time and resources to support learners' application back on the job. And again, something that we've all instinctively known, but interesting that she actually named that number at 25%. What I did see that people were looking for in the embedding, transfer and reinforcement field is the quick fix. They want the really easy way that it's going to be done, and they, in most cases, want the cheap way. Isn't that the solution that we all want? The quick, easy and cheap solution. And there were quite a few online tools, certainly in the expo, where people were looking at learning transfer solutions. What was interesting, though, is a lot of the online learning transfer tools are really focusing towards compliance and control. Whereas my real bottom line about learning transfer is that you need to encourage creativity and curiosity to get people engaged and to really create that sustained change. So I'm a little bit at odds with the online community, where I feel that people are actually just ticking boxes with a lot of the online learning transfer tools. The other interesting point I see about learning transfer, and maybe I'm a little bit guilty of this myself, is that really what we're actually looking for at the end of the day is behavioural change. Unless it's a compliance module where you're really just trying to get someone to learn something, most of the time we're after behavioural change. And I think we really need to call that, when we're talking about embedding the learning, so that we cut out this confusion as to whether it's about people remembering or people having the knowledge. It's, do they actually apply level 3 behavioural change back in the job? So I'm really going to start to encourage people to call a spade on that. So, Australian implications. I'd love to know what trend you think is going to be relevant in the coming year. So with some trends that we've just sort of touched on there, I'm just going to run another quick poll. Which trend do you think is going to be most relevant to you in the coming year? Neuroscience, mobile social, reinforcement, transfer, embedding. Just take a moment if you can to vote. I'd love to see people's feedback on this. Oh, it's a close call as the numbers are unfolding. And we're almost everyone voted now. We're just giving another couple of minutes for people that are a little bit indecisive. Excellent. So I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Interesting, 47% reinforcement, transfer, and embedding. That could be just because you're part of this community, guys, but I love it anyway. And 32% neuroscience. And certainly from the conversation that I've had with Colleen, who is in the Neuro Leadership Institute across in South Africa, the two are very closely entwined, neuroscience and reinforcement, transfer, and embedding. Social, great to see that people think that's important, and then just a little bit of the mobile there. Great. Thanks, guys, for sharing your thoughts on that. One of the key things that I saw about Australian trends is that we're definitely not behind the world here in Australia. We had a delegation at the ATD from this year, and we were all commenting that we were sort of wondering if there were going to be trends that we hadn't heard of coming out to us when we were in the US, but very much we felt that we were on top of it here in Australia and what was happening. We're very much not keeping our heads in the sand on that. And Con, thanks for your thoughts there around personalised learning. So yes, I think that's one of the trends that Elliot Macy is really talking to us about, and agreed that tailoring and solutions for the individual, for where they're at that moment in time, which could be through personalization, could be through a form of reinforcement, we could question, is going to be important. So Con, thanks for raising that and drawing our attention there. I may just need to get some quick guidance as to whether the poll is still viewing. No, I'm hopeful I'm back on our slides. So guys, that's the Australian implications. The real highlight of the conference, I know for many, many people, was because of the buzz that it created at the time and afterwards, was the work of Sugatra Mitra. And I don't know how many of you have heard of Sugatra Mitra. Again, you're welcome to comment in the questions box if you have. He was a TED Prize winner with his TED talk, and he inspired people no end in the conversation themselves. And he was one of the general sessions, leading at the edge of chaos. Now, to try and share Sugatra Mitra's presentation in a very short period would kind of do it justice, but I am going to give you the highlights because I just think it's too important not to. So this is the link here to his TED talk, building a school in the cloud, that he won an award for and some funding to help him with his project. So do check that out to get a more thorough understanding. But he basically talked about the concept of the horse and cart that was used way before even this picture shows us. I don't know how many years ago it was now, history escapes me, but when people didn't have access to motor cars, and they very much felt that there would always be a driver to take people around. Now, of course, when cars were developed, we didn't need the driver. We actually have the person driving the car themselves. And now in the next few years, we're going to be moving towards not even needing the driver, the participant to drive the car, but we're going to have driverless cars. And what Sugatra Mitra was saying was he was drawing the parallel between learning no longer needing a facilitator or a teacher in the classroom to the fact that people can actually learn very effectively without teachers. He spoke about the experiment that he did back in 1999 in India, in the slums, where he put a computer in the wall, giving them absolutely no instructions on how to use it. And within 2 weeks, they had worked out how to search the internet. Had done some amazing experiments in this, and the learnings that have come out of the hole in the wall are quite phenomenal. He then teamed up with Newcastle University in the UK, and they challenged him to disprove his hole in the wall theory that people could learn without teachers. And over a 6-month period, he challenged a group of children in, I think it was the Indian slums, or certainly in regional India, to learn the basics of DNA in a foreign language to their own. And he was really trying to say, look, this just can't be done. But the kids absolutely amazed him, and they did, within 6 months, learn the basics of DNA in another language. And he came up with a hypothesis, actually groups of children using the internet can learn anything themselves. And he called these groups of children a self-organized learning environment. And he spoke about needing just enough chaos that the learning then facilitates itself out of that chaotic environment. He then went on to develop this concept of the granny in the cloud. And actually, we've got here a photo of a grandpa in the cloud. But the idea was of the granny in the cloud was for regional areas where you would not be able to get a teacher involved or teacher to the classroom. You could actually have someone that has no knowledge of the content at all, supporting the children through simply encouraging, simply saying, wow, that's amazing. How did you do that? To really help children to continue learning. So really fascinating how much the granny in the cloud helped things move forward. And when I look at our learning transfer processes that we do here at Lever Transfer of Learning, is a lot of the time people say to us, well, how do you create transfer of learning if you're not really committed to the content and you don't have a thorough knowledge and understanding of the content? It's exactly the granny in the cloud principle. So that really resonated with me, that it's not about the content anymore. It's about encouraging people to learn and change. So with his funding from his TED Prize, Sugatra Mitra has now started to look at the school in the crowd, where we don't have passengers driving the car drives itself. And he creates classrooms where there's very little teaching or a facilitator role. And he talks about not making learning happen, but letting learning happen. Now, one interesting part of this is Sugatra is on a little bit of a crusade against the current examination or assessment system. And Neil, I noted there that you talked about standard assessment and qualifications needed within personal learning. Sugatra talked quite a lot about the requirement of schools. I think he talked about year 9, to actually take people away from this amazing way that they can learn themselves, to then shoehorn them back into an assessment process where they need to learn facts and figures and processes that they will not need in their future life. So very much he talked about our education system being designed to educate people that were going to work on factory lines or as secretaries for roles that actually no longer exist and certainly won't exist in the coming years. And he was a really a great advocate of allowing Google into the examination room. So some really kind of controversial ideas there within education. The keynote really was fascinating, and I'm sure I haven't done it justice there, but I do encourage you to kind of investigate his work on the intranet. What's interesting is to think about, though, the implications for organisational learning. And Sugatra Mitra had probably spent about 5 minutes on this, and he'd got the whole audience, hanging on his every word. One of the observations he made is that, for people learning in organizations at the moment, we're not childlike, and it is hard sometimes for people to have that air of curiosity when we have been taught an old way to learn. That said, when I was actually thinking about this process, for me, where we have true facilitated learning rather than content-driven learning, that really is a lot of the time, self-organized learning, where we have people discussing, learning through ideas, sharing, and peer collaboration. So I think some of these trends are certainly starting to come through in organizational learning. I think he's just taken it to the next level within education. So it will be fascinating to see how this starts to impact us. And I think, Con, you mentioned about mobile, and Gordon, you had the question about mobile. I think it'll be interesting, certainly when I was looking at some of the apps and things that Dan Steer was encouraging us to look at, a lot of those come from education. So when we are starting as learning and development professionals to be supporting learners who have come from a classroom environment that is very mobile driven or laptop driven, perhaps more so than other generations within the workplace, I think that will be an interesting dilemma and way for us to consider moving forward. So I've just got a couple of more things to share here with you guys. I would really encourage you to start thinking about some questions that we will have the time for at the end here today. And Neil, I can see your comment here. When we're talking about personalized, it's saying it's just ironic that we've moved towards personal learning but still have standardized assessment. Neil, thanks for confirming that. Sorry, I had kind of slightly missed your point there. Yes, and again, this is what Sugatra Mitra is saying, that we're changing the way of learning, but then when we put our assessment that's standardized on top of that, the two don't match. So you're in line with him there. So thanks for sharing and clarifying that. Okay, so the closing general session for the conference was Eric Wall, who is a graffiti artist and now keynote speaker. And he spoke about creativity and destructive strategies and really inspired the crowd with his paintings, which he did live on stage during the keynote. Phenomenal guy. And one of my favorite things from his presentation was that he spoke about, a lot of the time in training courses or when in learning, we ask people to think about, what's your definition of success? What does success look like? And he said he loves to challenge people as to what's your definition of failure, and getting people to think about negating failure versus the growth way of failure, loss versus opportunity, deficiency versus learning, and weakness versus development. So I thought that was a really interesting way to think of, let's not focus on success, but how do we handle failure that can help us be disruptive and creative. So some great work there from Eric Wall. And one of my favorite sessions from the conference, just taking us back to learning transfer, was a panel discussion about learning measurements and analytics. And interestingly, Australia right in the forefront there, with Sean Ridley from the Australian Institute of Management in Perth, that had done a study around the transfer of learning and what's required within transfer of learning. Sean's work was really interesting. Again, we can find some of it on the internet, or we can help refer you to his work. What's fascinating, though, I think in learning transfer, it is so broad. And again, Sean was looking across the whole gamut of before, during, and after. And I asked the questions as to whether he could tell from his research as to where the most impact could be had. And unfortunately, they hadn't got that level of research. So again, very broad areas that he looked at. And a good 15 areas that we can start to influence to improve learning transfer. Rick de Rijk was there from the Netherlands, and he's part of the ROI Institute across in Europe. Jim Kirkpatrick from Kirkpatrick's Partners was there, and so we're having a really good discussion about change, about evaluation, about measurement. And Laura was talking from her perspective of the programs that they had measured. So one of the things that I really love about the ATD is that you get a chance to talk with people who are out there doing projects much like yourself, really looking at what's working in other areas and really learning from people there. So guys, we have got just under 10 minutes today for questions. So if anyone would like to raise a hand or ask a question, I can throw it out to you. Or if you'd like to ask a question in the question box, more than happy to answer any questions that you've got there. Just waiting for some questions to come through. Hope I haven't stunned everyone into silence with my excitement from the ATD conference. I'll just give us a couple more minutes if anyone has got any questions to throw in here. Of course, you're very welcome to connect with me on LinkedIn. I know many of us already are connected. We're going to be sending you out an email link, which I'm hopeful will be with you by the time that you arrive back at your desks, or when you flick from the webinar onto over into the desktops. Oh, excellent, guys. Some questions have just come through here, so we will get those copies of the slides out to you. Thanks, Michelle, for your comments. Glad that you've got some tips and ideas to take away. The during slide, Denise, I will go back to that. So I think that's so you can get the Ginkgo reference. We'll certainly will send the slides out. Neil, embedding. I could talk for hours about embedding. So Neil's asked the question, anything else about embedding last in your trends list? So I think the real embedding. Okay, let me just think about the trend. Neil, it's a little bit difficult for me with embedding because I'm so close to the content in terms of our area of learning transfer specialism. I find it really challenging in my own mind to distill what are the outside trends and what is my own view. So I think the key is that a lot more people are talking about it, and there is a real staunch towards the online tools. I got involved in a conversation at the expo of a guy that I had met a couple of years previously who has an online tool, and he remembered our conversation from two years previously about behavioral change. And we looked through his tool. I'm not going to share which one it was. And I talked to him about our approach. And he just sort of said, well, of course, your approach is much better. And I thought, well, isn't that interesting? You're here promoting an online tool, yet you're already saying that there's challenges behind the way that you're actually getting the compliance. So for me, the real topic of the moment within embedding at the moment is online versus telephone in terms of embedding change. In terms of actually helping people learn and remember, and tips that are used within the classroom for stickiness, there wasn't that much of that at the conference anymore. So I think people have moved on from what they're trying to achieve in the classroom in terms of embedding. And Guy, topics and fads that were no longer being discussed. There was sort of less talk about 70-20-10 than I'd heard before. A little bit less talk about the whole stickiness and adult learning principles. Less talk about different types of learners. I think that had really moved into neuroscience. So hope that helps there, Guy. Building in the this is a question from Denise. Was there any discussion about the building of businesses in the learning and development sector, i.e. for practitioners? Denise, not that I came across, but I will certainly keep my eye open for you on that one. In fact, Denise, I don't know if you want to sort of just explain to everyone a little bit more of your question there, if you're happy to come off mute if you're in a quiet area. Maybe just jot in if you're happy to come off mute, or put your hand up, Denise, using the panel at the left-hand side at the bottom there. And meantime, I'll just check in with Ilona. Measurement and analytics, were there any new methods? So Ilona, this is quite interesting because, I have got a big interest in measurement and analytics. And thanks, Denise. See your hand. We'll come back to you in a second. New methods. I think the key thing that's the trend coming through is getting people to link their actions to a specific KPI when they're at an action planning or a commitment making stage. So certainly that's one of the trends that's coming through. I love the quote of not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that can be measured matters. And I kind of felt that summed up a lot about the sort of ROI measurement piece. Patty Phillips was there, and I went to her presentation around ROI and measurement. I think because they are so sort of seasoned in the field, there weren't necessarily new techniques with the ROI and measurement. I think what was new is the sort of analytics behind that and how you capture that data. So certainly the ROI Institute are looking more at online data capture as opposed to, sort of the old way of collecting data. Ilona, if you want more information on that, do give me a shout. And I know we're going to catch up very soon anyway, so that's fortuitous. But hopefully that shares a little bit around the measurement and analytics piece. Denise, I'll take you off mute just for a second, and we can just have your quick last question and see if you want to come in there. Denise, hi, you're off mute now. Do you want to share?
Hello there, can you hear me?
We've got you, thanks.
Excellent. So my question was around the actual, so as an L&D practitioner, you're in business for yourself. Mm-hmm. Was there any discussion around how to build your practice, how to be a better practitioner in terms of building your own business?
Great, Denise. Thanks for clarifying that question. Yes, there were sessions on that. But I have to say that I didn't get to any of those. With the 300 to choose from, I sort of went for the kind of the big ticket items that everyone was talking about, and then really focusing on learning trends and learning transfer and measurement. So there were sessions on that, but unfortunately, Denise, I didn't catch any of those. So sorry that I can't be super helpful there. If I hear of anything, I can certainly give you a shout on that. But thanks. Good question.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Thanks, Denise. So happy to share a copy of the slides. If you are interested in talking any further about learning transfer or implications for your organisation, very happy to do a complimentary consultation with you. And I just wanted to finish by encouraging people. Excuse me, having problems with my slideshow. The conference for the ATD 2016 is in Denver, Colorado. I'm just a passionate attendee, no affiliation with the ATD, but we may think about how we can become a delegate leader here from Australia. So if anyone is interested in attending and wants to get together to form part of a delegation, please do let me know and just reach out there. Thank you so much for your time today. We're almost dead on our 60 minutes, so I will wish you a great morning. Do check in on the feedback form. Love to hear back from you with your thoughts, and also very happy to send out a copy of the slides if that's useful. Very best wishes, everyone. Have a great day in learning. Thanks for attending today.